get on with the show here. Before I turn it over to Kyle and to you, Butch, I just want a couple of quick little things. Want to mention our new members. We have a few of them here this evening, and hopefully in the next few minutes we'll have other people coming in who unfortunately had to make that trip down the Lone Tree and go home. But our recent additions to the group are Sandy Ellis, Aaron Alfinger, who is here, Robert Hopkins, also here this evening, Kevin and Jordan, who are listening to us on their drive home, and John Salisbury, who was planning on being down to Lone Tree. I don't know if he connected with Bill Williams or not, but John's been a guest with us a couple of times, and he was ready to turn in his membership form and check this evening. Unfortunately, as we know, that probably didn't happen. But anyways, we'll be welcoming him into the group also. And I see Laurel we have here. Laurel is a friend of Aaron's. Laurel, if you'd unmute for just a second and let us know, obviously, how you found us through Aaron, but also the type of photography you do and what you might expect to find out of a good camera club like ours.
Hi, I just do photography for fun. Whatever seems to be there, I'll take pictures of. I like nature a whole lot. I like taking pictures of my dogs, whatnot. Um, I'm just hoping to find some more, I guess, reason to shoot. I've tried taking like the 52 frames and trying to keep invested in that, but I really enjoy it. But I'm just kind of hoping to find learn some more things, and find more reasons to keep in the hobby.
Well, great. Well, hopefully we can provide you with some inspiration and help you along the way. I don't have anything further other than those things, so Kyle, then Butch, take it away.
This is tonight's presentation is Butch Mazzuca, as you guys know. Butch wears a few hats. He's a columnist, writer, and author. He is a maybe retired now, I'm not sure, but a ski instructor and also a photographer. And he is a very well rewarded photographer. His resume is quite long on his website, which is simply butchmazzuca.com. I'm sure he'll share that with us. But yeah, I'm happy to have him here tonight because my scores have been trending downward, and he's here to talk about 33 hacks to improve your program scores or competition scores. So take it away, Butch.
Okay, thank you so much, Kyle. Appreciate that. Let me do my screen share. Thanks so much for having me this evening. I've been making this presentation to various clubs around the country, and based on the feedback, it's been well received. And it's my hope that the members here at Focus will feel the same way. Before I begin, though, I need to give credit where credit is due. And the idea for this presentation came from a Kelby One video by Rick Sammons. I met Rick years ago at a competition, and I've always loved the way he presented his material. And after watching the video, I decided to meld many of Rick's tips with ideas, techniques, and things that I've learned over the years during workshops from other photographers and by watching competition judges closely. So this evening's presentation will be in two parts. In part one, we'll review the 33 hacks on how to improve your scores in club competitions, which I've illustrated with roughly about 150 images. And I'll follow that with a Q&A. Then we'll take a short break before presenting part two. Normally, the hacks presentation is about 45 minutes long, but Kyle asked me to go longer. So instead of stretching a 45-minute presentation into an hour or longer, I added an addendum where I'll illustrate a random assortment of photographic ideas, tips, and protocols that I think you'll enjoy, and I'll follow that with a second Q&A. So if you ask 10 photographers what makes a good photograph, you're likely to get 10 different answers. But if you ask what most often wins in competitions, there's only one answer. Impact, visual interest, and storytelling are the fundamental characteristics that most often succeed in photo competitions. Thus, these are the three aspects of an image that need to be the hook that grabs and keeps the viewer's attention, and they outweigh any minor technical deficiencies. Okay, I'm clicking on three images here. These are three very different images. And like the previous page, each compels the viewer to take a moment to study it, even if you're not an ornithologist, a cowboy, or a sketch artist. Each has a degree of impact and a degree of visual interest. Personally, I use the 6-second rule. I find myself that if I look at an image for more than 6 seconds, I know that I'm looking at a good photograph. So let's begin with hack number one. Before you press the shutter button, ask yourself, what's my subject? And I can't tell you how absolutely critical this is. If you can't describe your subject in a phrase, then it's likely you don't have a clear subject. Now, there shouldn't be any doubt in your mind as to what my subject is in this image, or in this image of the very large array in Socorro, New Mexico, or in this very serene scene. This image was shot near Vail, Colorado. And in each of these cases, there shouldn't be any question as to what the subject is. So let's go to hack number two. And we've all heard this before, but it's worth repeating. Fill the frame. And only with the elements, and the only elements that should be in your frame are your subject and those elements that support it. I'm going to show you a few examples. Well, the skates are my center of interest in this image. It's the blurred background that tells the story. In this image, shot in the Grand Tetons, the geese, while a minor component, are absolutely essential to the story being told. Now, this is a fabulous image taken by Rick Sammons, and I'll use it several times during this presentation, but for now, I just want you to notice how the negative space to the right of the subject is absolutely essential to telling this whimsical story that could very well be a magazine ad. Now, I titled this particular image Trepidation because of the expression and the kayaker's face. Meanwhile, only what's included within the yellow box is essential to the story. Everything else is extraneous and unnecessary. There's a few loose branches and other distractions above the kayaker, and of course the dark rock on the lower left, but those are easily removed in post. So here's the image as I would submit it into a competition. Now, yes, I did say fill the frame, but only with what's necessary to support your subject or tell your story. By cropping in tight, the judge has no idea what's causing the trepidation we see in the kayaker's face, compelling the judge to ask, what's below the kayaker? What's so scary? Is it a lion, a tiger, a shark? The answer is we don't know, but more importantly, neither does the judge. But with this crop, the story is complete. However, there are times when it is necessary to crop in tight. So here's a tip on cropping for effect. Let your story be your guide. Remember, the only element that should be in your frame are those elements that help to tell your story. And when you're wondering about what to include or exclude from an image, remember, if it doesn't help tell your story, leave it out. Hack number 3, Rick Sammon refers to this as dead center is deadly. I was always taught that your subject isn't a bullseye. Actually, I think Rick's expression is catchier. But either way, the problem with placing the subject in the center of the frame is that a centered subject invites the eye to look around the frame, drawing attention away from what you want the viewer to look at. Let's face it, attractive women always draw the viewer's eye, and this is an attractive woman. However, note how your eye tends to wander a bit, noticing the fencing and the bench behind her, and that's because I placed her dead center in the frame. However, when the subject is off center, the eye naturally stays focused on the subject, not dissimilar to the way the brain works when we use the rule of thirds we put our subject on a PowerPoint. I took this photo in Kenya a couple years ago. And in this case, I thought the black and white rendition was far more dramatic than the color version. And just notice the fabulous light on the lion's face. You know, this is, maybe many of the folks here have seen this, but this is the iconic shot of the Crystal Mill near Marble, Colorado. Notice how the eye goes directly to the mill, then to the river and falls that complete the story. You almost have to force your eye to take in the semi-barren area at the top of the frame. I shot this yucca plant in White Sands, New Mexico. In this image, while you're aware of the sloping terrain, the indistinct landscape on the right, and the multi-tone pastel sky, your eye remains on the subject. The common denominator in each of these images is that the subject is off-center. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but more often than not, a centered subject is going to get dinged by a judge. Hack number 4, do not let your tripod grow roots. When you arrive at your shooting location and before you attach your camera to your tripod, walk around. Go to the left of your subject, go to the right of your subject, get behind your subject if you can, and don't settle on the obvious perspective. Now, I'm going to share something with you, and you may find it interesting as I do. For some unknown reason, and scientists have debated this for years, when a photographer attaches his or her camera to their tripod, the legs of the tripod behave as if they're set in cement. I'll illustrate this phenomenon. Please notice that the lone photographer who did decide to look for a different perspective left her camera and tripod behind. Only one photographer in this group walked around with her camera looking for different perspectives. The other 3 were locked into their positions and grappling with gear. It is a lot easier to move around when you don't have a tripod attached to the bottom of your camera. Another reality is that the scene depicted by the photo on the left is a far more common occurrence than the one depicted by the photo on the right. So when you're out shooting, don't allow your tripod to dictate your composition. Hack 5. Now this is very, very basic, but expose for the highlights. It's also known sometimes as exposing to the right. This is one of Rick Salmon's images, and he exposed on the bright blue script on the blue swallow sign. I took this particular shot in Rattlesnake Canyon here in Arizona. I was shooting without a tripod and at a very odd angle, so I wouldn't even try HDR. Instead, I exposed for the brightest part of the rock formation, rotated the image 90 degrees in post, and I titled it Heart of Stone. Number 6, clipped subjects. This is a real pet peeve of mine, and most judges too. Clipped subjects are a mortal sin in wildlife photography. Don't do it. Here is the complete subject. When viewed side by side, it should be obvious that the clipped subject is a no-go. So here's my rule of thumb. In this image, the viewer knows exactly where the elephant's feet are. And the same with this image, even though we can't see them. There's nothing clipped to distract you. And like I said, the viewer knows where the entire animal is. Seriously, which image do you think is going to score better? Yet I'm amazed at how many times when I'm judging a photo competition, and I probably do about 7 or 8 a year, that I see images just like the one on the right, and people don't understand why they're getting 3s and 4s instead of 5s. Now, I don't want to beat this point to death, but clipping subjects doesn't apply to just wildlife alone. 95% of the time, judges want to see the entire animal, including its reflection. But in this image, the Kamar horses are cropped way too tight on the left. Now, if I were judging on a 5-point scale, this image has so much impact and visual interest that I would award the image a 5 and tell the maker he or she might want to recrop or add some canvas. However, if this were in a salon or an international competition, it would absolutely get dinged for a close crop. But come on, we're talking photo club competitions, which are supposed to be fun and intended to educate. So at a club competition, I would definitely give the person a 5, but I would point out the tight crop so at least the maker learns something. This way, the maker doesn't feel deflated because after all, this is a dynamite image. Recall what we talked about at the top of the presentation. Impact and visual interest are more important than minor technical deficiencies. Judges want to see the entire subject. So which of the two compositions do you think would be awarded a higher score? These next 3 hacks are the 3 easiest things you can do to immediately improve your scores. Hack 7, 8, and 9 are all about eliminating distracting elements. They are easy to incorporate, and it's amazing how your scores will improve. So let's take a look at these one at a time. Hack 7, eliminate the obvious distractions. So, how many distractions do you see in this image? I count 13.
I was going to say too many to mention, but yes, 13's good.
And it's amazing how we can improve our chances in a club competition just by eliminating the distractions. This is now a much, much cleaner image and will likely score higher in a competition. Meanwhile, all the white number 5s against the green background, the jockey, the horse, the tote board, become much more apparent to the viewer, and they tell a great story. Hack number 8 is border control. Always conduct border control and background checks. While this image would do well in a Photographic Society of America nature competition, it won't do well in a club competition because it is loaded with distractions. The right edge of the image is a parsed tree and the wildebeest in the background, very distracting. So while this is an okay nature shot, as I said, it will not do well in a club competition. Now, this image at first blush seems like a winner. But there we can see some minor distractions. Now, if I were judging a club competition and I saw just one of those wispy clouds along the edge of the frame, I'd blow it off, give the maker a 5, and tell him or her to remove the distraction in post. However, with 3 distractions, the judge is going to ding it. These are the remnants of a pier in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. I used a long exposure to smooth out the water, and I thought I had an absolutely winning shot with beautiful pastels. But what I did not see were the mergers of the soft breaking wave merged with the top of the 2 of the old pier's pilings, and it spoiled what could have been an absolutely beautiful composition. This one bummed me out because I really thought I had a winner with this shot. You know, and like most of us that live out here, I like shooting rodeos, but rodeos have their own challenges. In this image, I got the bull looking right into the lens. I captured the cowbell, the rider in a great position. I even captured some bull snot, but a wrangler on the gate merged with the subject. So I had to place this image in the not for competition folder. No excuses on this. I simply blew it on this image. But the truly sad part of this story, and I'll bet many of the people that are watching this have done the same thing, is I took this photo in Tahiti, and it's highly unlikely that I'll ever travel there again. You know, the only thing I can do is chalk that up to a missed opportunity. Now, let's go back to Our Lady in the Desert. Notice how Rick had the woman turn down the brim of her hat, preventing the ridgeline of the dune from merging with her face. Notice, too, how the end of her sleeve by her wrist blends seamlessly with the ridgeline. I mean, that is the mark of a real pro. How many times do we have a great subject with a distracting background? So always keep in mind, The background is as important as your subject. Even though this mating pair of great horned owls are tack sharp, I wouldn't even consider this image for competition. Whereas the osprey with its prey on the right would score well because the background is clean, it fills the frame, and it tells a story. There is no way the image on the left works, no matter what the maker does in post, because the background is atrocious, whereas the image on the right will do or has done very well in competition. As noted, never lose sight of the fact that backgrounds are absolutely critical. Remember, as I said before, your background is as important as your subject. Also, as a point of interest, note how I made use of atmospheric depth in the image on the right. And that was taken from an Imperial Point along the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Act number 9, separate, separate, separate. I love the shot that Rick took of these Sri Lankan fishermen. Meanwhile, I shot this in the Masai Mara in Kenya, using the same principle, separation. This is an image of Chinaman's Hat along the northeast shore of Oahu. But in each of these 3 images, it was critical to separate the subject from both the background and from the other elements in the frame, because as noted, a merger can ruin an otherwise very strong image. So let me recap briefly. If you're looking for a quick and easy way to improve your scores, eliminate the distractions, do border control and background checks, and separate, separate, separate. Hack number 10, an interesting subject makes it a lot easier for the judge to award a high score. Interesting subjects are a matter of subject selection. For example, an image of a leopard in Botswana is going to be far more interesting than a similarly composed image of a common house cat. Visual interest means the subject itself must be something that an uninformed viewer will take the time to study and consider. So let's look at a few random images where the subject matter compels the viewer to hang around and consider the image. As an FYI, this is not a leading line because leading lines lead the viewer to a subject. Rather, I use the diagonal line here to create interest and a sense of depth. Now, this was just a fun shot taken outside an iconic watering hole near Vail. And like I said, it's not something you see every day. I thought it was interesting. In wildlife images, images of mamas and their young will always grab a judge's attention, and they almost always win. The common denominator is that all of these subjects are interesting to look at, whether it's their subject matter or their uniqueness. Hack 11, when you're photographing wildlife, you want to shoot at or slightly below your subject's eye level whenever possible. Now, this is a shot of a martial eagle chick that I took in Botswana a few years ago. I got as low as I could without falling out of the safari vehicle. So shooting at or just below the eye level is going to improve your scores. This was a couple years ago. I was hiking near Vail, and I was amazed at how close I got to this fawn. But again, I crouched down a little bit and got to its eye level. I captured this mother and the kid on Mount Evans. I think the Mount Evans, they've changed the name now. But anyway, it was Mount Evans when I was there. Now, this is one I don't recommend. But we were staying at the lagoon camp in the Okavango Delta in Botswana. I was in the shower when this Elling came walking through camp. I grabbed my towel, wrapped it around me, ducked back into the tent to get the camera. And as soon as I started shooting, this old gal turned and took an interest in me. I swear, every fiber of my body knew this animal meant me no harm. So I just kept on shooting and shooting until she reached in with her trunk, and I wasn't sure if she was reaching for the shower head or my camera, but at that moment I lost my nerve and I ducked back into the tent. Anyway, that was a very interesting experience, and I thought I would share it. 12. Wildlife needs to be facing within 90 degrees of the camera. I shot this lioness in Botswana. Her full belly and blood on her face tells the story. This image was accepted by, but unfortunately not published by National Geographic. Nonetheless, the power of the image is that the wildebeest are moving directly towards the camera. This was another image that was accepted by, but not published by Nat Geo. And here's a tip. Images containing S-curves always score very well in competitions. And of course, sometimes you can bend the rules if the image tells an interesting story. But as a general rule, subjects moving towards the camera will score higher than subjects moving away from the camera. Hack number 13, the eyes have it. My wife and I traveled to Tahiti after my heart surgery in 2017 when I saw this woman sitting by a fruit stand. I smiled, I held up my camera, she smiled, nodded, gesturing okay, and I captured the shot. The woman's eyes make this image. Now, my grandkids are probably my favorite subjects for portraiture, which I don't do a lot of. And as you can see, it's the eyes in both images that grab your attention. Here's an image I shot at the GoPro Games in Vail a few years ago. Remember, we capture a subject looking directly into the lens, it makes a connection with the viewer, and that includes judges. My wife and I visited this one-room schoolhouse in Kenya where I was able to capture this shot. Obviously, the youngster found the stranger with a camera a lot more interesting than her studies. I love this shot. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to shoot a training exercise in Vail for the Eagle Valley Fire Department. It was 8 p.m. when I took this shot, but the firefighters had been putting out practice fires since before noon. And as you can see in this firefighter's eyes, he was exhausted. Again, the eyes are the window to the soul, and the eyes will always tell the story. Capturing tack-sharp eyes also applies to wildlife. And in each of these images, I was able to capture the lions looking directly into the lens. Again, making a connection with the viewer. Obviously, a photographer isn't going to get that type of connection with birds, but tack-sharp eyes are critical in all wildlife images. Hack number 14. Now, this one, it took me a while to wrap my arms around this one. But once I understood that shadows bring images to life, it literally changed my photography. I hope you can see that it's the shadows that give this image its energy. The shadows define both the dunes and the subject. Note the shadows on the woman's face, her clothes, her hat. Without the shadows, this is a lifeless image. In this image, I needed 2 speedlights to get the shadows just the way I wanted them. And in this desert photo, it's the shadows that define the texture of the ridges. Now, this is a light painted image, and light painting is all about using shadows to create impact and visual interest. In this image, this was taken at the rookery next to the alligator farm in St. Augustine, Florida. The low perspective is dramatic, but it's the shadows that really make this image. Here's another light painted image. And here I use the title to give the judge a heads up about my vision. We'll discuss titles in hack number 26. And yet another light painted image that I think you would agree would lose all impact if I had shot this at 12 noon with the sun directly overhead. Hack number 15. Ansel Adams told us, you don't take a photograph, you make it. This was a drive-by grab shot. As it turned out, there was a very interesting image in all that tangle, although you wouldn't have seen it at first. Always check your histogram because it is amazing what we can do in post if you have a good histogram. I took this shot from the parking lot at the Sonoran Desert Museum here in Tucson while leaning against my car to steady myself. I saw that I had a good histogram and took the shot, which I flipped in post to draw the viewer through the frame from left to right. When I saw these mountain goat kids, I was struck by the relationship to each other. So I took the shot, hoping I could make something of it in spite of the background distractions, because I had a good histogram. And when I returned home, I cropped in, went high key, and placed the eyes on PowerPoints. I shot this image from the deck of a beach house my wife and I rented in St. George Island, Florida. The second I saw the flag waving, the people on the beach, the sun and the clouds, I knew there was a photograph in there somewhere. So I purposely shot wide, not being sure of just how I was going to compose and post. I exposed for the sky, focused on the flag, and with a bit of work in Lightroom, got a great shot that I titled, Good Morning, America. This is another photo I took at the Rookery in St. Augustine, Florida. Now, this shot involved a lot of work in post, actually, but I had a good histogram, and I spent quite a bit of time in Photoshop. I was taking a PSA photo competitions course at the time, and my instructor suggested I submit it into an international salon competition, which I didn't, but nonetheless, I was pleased with the result. As an aside, when I submitted the image into a club competition, the judge said, well, this was obviously taken with studio lights. So much for judges sometimes. Nonetheless, she gave it a high score. I took this shot in Botswana, but I wanted to add impact. So I removed the foliage to create a bit of an artsy and, in my opinion, an image with more impact. This is the same image with a plain black background. Now, the reason I put these in here, this is interesting because the upper image would do better in a Photographic Society of America nature competition, but the lower image, in my opinion, would do better in a club competition. Act 16, when you're photographing people, think of your camera as a mirror, because if you're having fun, the people you're photographing are going to have fun. This youngster in Kenya, she was so shy. So I took a photo of her shoes, and when I showed her my LED screen, she broke into this big smile. Suddenly she was having fun, and so was I. Now, both these images, I was having a ball, and I think it showed in the kids' faces. And look how happy these young boys are where I took this shot. And in this image, I included Mom because her t-shirt gave the photo a sense of place. The bottom line with people images is, if you're smiling, having fun, it's likely your subjects will be too. Act 17, shoot through it. To me, this is Rick Salmon at his best. This automobile shot may appear to be an example of framing, but that's not what's really going on. This is an example of framing. Here I framed the boats with the pilings from the pier I was standing on. This is also an example of framing, where I framed the cowboy's upper body with his lariat. Whereas in this image that Rick took, he filled the entire frame with visual interest. So try shooting through something. You'll be amazed at how interesting and unusual of a photo you can get. Now, this is an image of Buck Canyon shot through Mesa Arch in Canyonlands National Park. Neither the arch nor Buck Canyon on their own has the impact of shooting through it. And in this image too, neither the buttes in the distance nor the old weather log are as interesting alone as they are together. Hack 18, on-camera flash is not your friend. It is harsh, it is flat, it is unflattering. I shot this moth on the left and a butterfly on the right at the Tucson Botanic Gardens using an off-camera flash attached to a portable softbox. This is a photo of Alona Wright, the receptionist where I used to get my hair cut in Vail. Alona was always perfectly coiffed, so one day I asked her if she'd model for me. I shot this with an off-camera flash through window blinds, more on that later. I bought it at Home Depot for, I think, 20 bucks. It took a while adjusting the louvers to get Alona's eyes, lips, and hands in the light, but it was fun and it took first place in a shadows competition. Then I got the idea to use this Venetian blind effect as a background when I was photographing my two eldest grandkids. I used the second flash through a grid to direct the light to keep some shadow on their faces. Once again, I was using light and shadow to do something a little bit different. And if you're wondering why I put aviator sunglasses on my grandkids, well, it's because props rock. I took these images at an antique car exhibit in Denver when I lived there and asked several of the hostesses to pose for me. What I didn't know at the time is that most of the hostesses were also part-time models. For the image on the left, I simply asked her to look over her sunglasses as if I had just interrupted her. As for the image on the right, I've always thought the act of women applying lipstick was kind of sexy. So I asked another hostess to pose in one of the vehicles and put on her lipstick, looking into the antique car's rearview mirror. This image was taken backstage at a dinner playhouse where I asked this young lady to crisscross the mask across her body. This is Alona again, and I used an opaque sheet of glass for the reflection and used a handheld daylight balanced ice light as my source of light. You can check out Ice Light at B&H Photo. They are absolutely phenomenal for indoor photography. As I said, we would see this image again and again. Note the props, her hat, her purse, her camera, all of which were necessary to create this whimsical desert scene. Props rock. Hack number 20, don't oversaturate. It's so easy to do. As a matter of fact, I almost never use saturation. This is Brenda Bach, the woman who cut my hair when I lived in Vail. We saw her earlier in the presentation about centering images, and I use her here to illustrate the difference between vibrance and saturation. In the image on the left is as shot. The middle image, I used vibrance, and on the right, I use saturation. Notice how the skin tones in the middle image, while enhanced, are still natural looking, but look unnatural in the image on the right where I use saturation. Remember, vibrance does not affect skin tones. You'll also note that these images I crop so she's centered in the frame, horizontally, but not centered vertically. Little things can make a big difference. Hack 21, mind over mattress. This is a shot I took at Lake McDonald's in Glacier National Park. And being just south of the Canadian border, sunrise is early and sunset is late in the summertime. So when the sun rises at 5:30 a.m., it means you need to arrive at your shooting location by 4:30 a.m. to set up and find your composition, which means you need to leave your motel by 4 a.m., which means getting up at 3:30 a.m. You can do the night calculation yourself with sunset at 9:30. But the bottom line is in many, if not most cases, capturing dramatic landscape shots means getting very little sleep. Now, I want to spend some time on this because I am amazed at how many potential award-winning shots do not score well because they're taken in the middle of the day. This fall color shot was taken in southern Colorado at about 12:45. It's a beautiful scene. It's technically spot on. The maker composed it with a leading line that brings the viewer into and through the layers of the frame, but the image is flat. So if you're going to shoot landscapes, remember, try shooting within an hour of sunrise or sunset. This is one of my very favorite African wildlife shots. My PSA competitions instructor suggested I submit it into an international competition, and I did. It wound up taking second place out of, I think, 900 entries. I was really pleased with that. And I remember how our safari guide wanted to head back to camp as the sun was setting, but I insisted that we remain in the bush until after the sun set. and I'm really glad that I did. Hack number 22 is play it again, Sam. This is another Salmonism. When you find an interesting location, shoot it again. Shoot it at a different time of day or a different time of year. Recompose, vary your settings. You're already familiar with the scene, so take advantage of the knowledge that you already have. 23. Sometimes you just don't have a shot, and a good photographer will admit that to themselves. And how many times do we try to make something out of nothing? Hack number 24, weather packs a punch. Weather shots always have impact. This image contains a ton of visual interest, but without the snow, it loses much of its impact. Storms can be very, very dramatic. I met a local realtor who's a storm chaser here in Tucson. I accompanied him last monsoon season, and I captured this shot about 30 miles south of here, of where I live. Notice the mood that is created by this winter scene. And speaking of mood, while the long exposure was necessary to capture the city lights, it also created some moody clouds. And never underestimate the effect of mood in a photograph. Now in this one, can't you just feel the cold in this image? Now in this image, this is an example of what I refer to as atmospherics. In this case, it's splashing water, but smoke, sunburst, dust, even somebody's breath on a cold day that functions much the same way as weather. They all add impact to an image and usually score very well in competitions. In this image, it's the trail dust that gives this image its visual interest. And here, the sunburst coupled with the unique perspective makes this flower image pop. Hack number 25, interesting faces make for interesting images. I had to take a pair of shoes in for soles and heels and thought the owner had an interesting face. So I asked him if I could photograph him when I came back, and he said, fine. Now here's an interesting face, yes, but note the props. It's the hat and the cigar that really make this image. I told you we'd talk about titles again, and titles are far more important than many photographers realize. And remember, just like using a watermark, a title becomes a part of your image. So please take a moment to read this. A clever title gives you a much better chance to grab and hold the judge's interest. A good title gives the photographer an edge in a competition. It provides the judge with an insight into his or her vision. And we never want to leave this to the judge's interpretation. I think you'll agree that the title Best Friends tells a much better story. And here I created a title that matched the kayaker's expression. And the most interesting aspect of this image, other than the C curve, is that it features the three principal players operating the train: the engineer, the fireman, and the conductor. Hack number 7, don't be afraid to suspend reality. When a friend of mine saw this image, he said, did it really look like that? Of course it didn't look like that. It looked like that in Lightroom after a 20-second exposure, because the camera can see what the human eye cannot. But that's not the point. My goal was to create drama, which is what light painting and long exposures are all about. I created this for a competition theme about altered reality. I've only ever had one person guess what this image was without looking at the title. My middle grandson, who plays guitar, figured out. I shot this in the desert using a 1-hour exposure. Once again, this isn't real, but it is. But I suspended reality. This was the first image I ever had published, Shutterbug magazine published this image in 2009. That's when I started taking pictures after my first trip to Africa. The moral of the story is that it's good to think outside the box sometimes. Hack 28, keep it clean. I know this is common sense, but it's amazing how many people neglect their equipment. Dust spots can destroy an image, especially when amplified by the sun. As an aside, I belong to Canon Professional Services, and for $100 a year, I get 2 free cleanings of the camera or lens, but more importantly, whenever I have an issue with my camera, I pick up the phone and 3 rings later, I'm speaking with a Canon rep. I don't know about the other manufacturers like Nikon, Sony, whomever, but it certainly is worth looking into. Hack number 29, gestures bring images to life. Note the hand gesture, not only does it block the ridge line, as I mentioned earlier, but it adds life to the photo. On the left, my granddaughter's shrug, and on the right, the young woman's shushing gesture add interest and give these images energy. The little girl on the left with her arm around her sister just stole my heart. And of course, I asked the mother if I could shoot her kids, and of course, I told her I'd send her copies of the photos. Always ask permission to photograph someone else's kids. I know we all know that, but it never hurts to be reminded. And here's a hack within a hack. Judges love anthropomorphism, and these types of images always score well in club competitions. People that include, and that includes judges, project human emotions on animals all the time. And anytime you can get a, isn't that cute reaction from a judge, you're going to get a high score. So look for those opportunities whenever you're photographing wildlife. Now, you're not going to get an, oh, isn't that cute with a bird image. So when shooting birds, you also want to look for gestures. Here, the auger buzzard on the left is nothing without the gesture of the open beak. And the image of the falcon on the right is nothing more than a bird on a stick without the gesture of the lifted tail. Hack 30, landscape images need dramatic skies. It is amazing how many photographers neglect this. I took this a few years ago in Utah. I think this was in the Wasatch Range. In this image, I put in a clear blue sky in Photoshop to illustrate the difference between clouds and not having clouds. And in this image, I did the absolute reverse and added the sky. As an aside, I fooled with the color temperature a bit and added contrast to keep the entire image the same tone. Hack number 31. We've been told to always leave room for the subject to travel into, but it's also okay to break the rules sometimes, like I did in this next image. Here, I wanted to create the illusion of motion, so I placed the subjects to the far right of the frame. By the way, this image was not Photoshopped. Hack number 32, slow down and take your time. Ansel Adams once said, the single most important component of a camera is the 12 inches behind it. So take your time, think about what you're shooting, what's your subject, what story do you want to tell, give thought to your settings, vary your exposure times, especially with moving water and clouds. Try HDR, change your perspective, get down low, use various depths of field with the same composition. The bottom line is if you thought enough about the scene to shoot it in the first place, then take full advantage of the time that you have. Now, hack number 33, taking artistic license is okay. This image of the wildebeest absolutely lacked energy, so I canted it about 40 degrees, which really brought the image to life and got it published in Africa Geographic. Here I was shooting Delicate Arch in Arches National Park, hoping to capture the sun lighting up the arch. But the high sky was a little hazy that day, and then 2 hikers wandered into my frame. So I just stopped down to create a silhouette and took the shot. I then took a photo of the moon, which is over my left shoulder, and blended the images in Photoshop when I got home. Artistic license includes motion blur. So remember, when creating motion blur shots, the subject's most prominent or important feature, in this case, the zebra's head, must be tack sharp or the image is a bust. So we have come to the end of the line. So right about now, I will open this up to a little Q&A, and you can see what we've discussed. Like I said, we'll do a Q&A before we move on to part 2.
Hey, Butch, Todd Lytle. I didn't know you moved to Tucson. I was standing next to you when you took that shot at the GoPro games in Vail. I think at the time you lived in Vail. And I do have a question, if you can remember where you took this. You have a picture of a guy smoking a cigar, possibly Cuba. And I'm curious if you remember where you took it. I swear I photographed the same guy. I'll tell you where in a minute.
Oh, you know what? You may have. That was I did that was, I took about 95% of the shots, but that one was one that I borrowed from a friend because I was looking for something just like that, a man with a silly hat or a cigar. So I can't answer that question.
Ah, you think? Yeah. Would you suspect your friend took it in Cuba?
Oh no, I know he took it in Cuba.
Ah. Then I'm certain I shot the same guy.
Good for you. Did you get the same shot as of the kayaker as I did?
No, absolutely not. And you already entered yours in a competition for focus and scored high, so I knew better than to try.
Oh,
So, Butch,
anybody else have any questions?
I do. I have a couple of statements. First of all, I just want to say I sincerely appreciate your work. I am looking at it, and some of the images are amazing. I'm really enjoying the presentation. This is a rhetorical question. This is a personal issue of mine. I have a problem with titles, and I have a problem with titles simply because English, it's not my first language. So sometimes I wonder if you're judging an international competition. And somebody's made up instrument from Kenya, and the title is not in English, would it make the same sense? And as I said, it's a rhetorical question. But we talked about this in the club, and I've been making an effort to try to make titles a little bit more appealing. However, the last thing that I want to say, it's a low blow, really, because you mentioned that there's different camera manufacturers. I thought that there was just one, Canon. And that was the low blow.
You both like that soft focus.
But no, I'm really enjoying this a lot. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words. Anybody else? And by the way, I just wanted to say hi to Gwen. Gwen, I happened to see her that she joined the Zoom. I haven't seen you for a while. But any other, if not, then we'll just break for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get back and we'll do the second half of the show. That sound okay to you, Kyle?
Yeah, that sounds great. So certainly by 7:45, maybe like split the difference, 7:42. Is that something like that? 6 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. You about ready, Kyle?
Yeah, maybe give it 30
You
seconds.
tell me when to go.
Take it away, Butch. Timing's good.
All right, just some random ideas now about taking better photographs, and not in any particular order. And these are the items, and we are not going to discuss this in detail. We're just going to touch on these, and hopefully you'll pick up a few ideas that'll help your photography a bit. Okay, but before we begin, for those interested, this is the best book on digital photography that I have ever come across. Most of us have seen or heard much of what's in this book, but the average photo club member is going to find this book fascinating. It is loaded with good information. He must have 20 or 30 links to videos. It is just an outstanding book. Regardless if you're a beginner or an expert photographer, I promise you'll learn something from this book. Really, really good. Tony Northrup's Stunning Digital Photography. Okay. Everyone realizes that post-processing is critical in digital photography. As a matter of fact, it's 50% of it. And just like a good foundation is necessary for a well-constructed building, so too good digital photography begins with getting it right in the camera. Because without a good foundation, likely or not, you're not going to be satisfied with the end result. So I want to start here with preparing a file in Lightroom. Now, I use Lightroom, and for people that use other applications, I'm sorry, this part of it is just focused on Lightroom. And, I don't like reading from slides, but I think it's important to go through these steps individually. Okay. First of all, in the Lightroom Develop module, I'm sure everybody clicks and they check for lens correction and chromatic aberration. And that is in the Develop module. Then you import into Lightroom. And after it's imported into Lightroom, what I do, and I will highly recommend this, is enhance the image. It reduces noise and provides the cleanest possible raw details. I'm going to go into this a little bit more later, but I can't tell you how important enhancing the image is. Actually, when you enhance, I think it does a better job with noise than Topaz. It is just excellent. Okay, the next thing I do is correct for the white balance. Number 5, it's like most of us, we set the white and black points. Then I adjust for exposure globally. I almost always reduce highlights and open shadows. But those are the basic steps that I take on just about every single image. And from there, whatever it is that you want to do. What does enhance actually do? The best way I can explain it is it gives you the cleanest possible image that you can get to work with. When you're in the Develop module and you right click, Enhance will come up like that. So you click on Enhance, and then this is what you're going to get. You want to check on denoise, you want to check denoise, you want to check raw details, and create stack. If super resolution is checked, uncheck that. But you check on those 3 items, in about 10 seconds or so, your image will appear stacked and it'll appear as a DNG. So you'll still have your raw, and then on top of it will be your DNG, which is completely enhanced, and that's the image that you want to work with. Now, I want to talk about something else for a bit, post-processing and sky replacement. I am not big on sky replacement. I kind of view it as cheating, I don't know. But every now and then I'll use it if I have a specific reason. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because how often do we get an interesting subject with just one of these gloriously boring skies? So we don't want that. We want to take full advantage of the subject and have a nice sky behind it. So how do we get from what's on the left to what's on the right? The problem with sky replacement is that when you replace the sky in Photoshop, sometimes, not all the time, but I'd say about 70–80% of the time, the replaced sky bleeds over the edges of the image where you want to replace the sky. So here's an option, and I'll take this step at a time. Export your Lightroom image into Photoshop. Then choose a sky in Photoshop, edit, replace sky, and replace the sky in your image. Then export the new image with Photoshop's replace sky back into Lightroom. Then you'll have number 4. You'll now have the file with the Lightroom replace sky side by side with the original Lightroom. And remember, the image with Lightroom replace sky there might be some bleeding in there. So that's when we take it to this step. Then you export both of those, the Photoshop sky and the original, back into Photoshop using open in layers. And then once you get it in Photoshop, mask and invert the sky in the original and blend the two, and then import them back into Lightroom from Photoshop, and that's the end result. But just be careful when you're replacing skies, because the Photoshop has a tendency for them to bleed over into your image. This was one of those cases. I loved this shot, for whatever reason. And I have a lot of shots of leopards, but you can see that I had a good histogram, but the sky was just this milky white. It was terrible. So in this type of a situation, I'll replace the sky. I never put this into competition, but I wanted this image for my scrapbook, and I wanted a decent sky in there. The other thing that I use quite a bit, and I don't know how many people use it, but the Nik suite. And I just find that the Nik suite is just incredible. And with this particular image, I took it into what is known as one of the modes, the Color Effects Pro, and I use total contrast, the skylight filter, and darken, light, and center filter, which I use those on, I'd say 70% of my images. And you can control the intensity on every one of those sliders over on the right-hand side. So if you want more or less contrast, or you want to move the light and darken center filter around, you can do it. And this was the image that I came up with, and I love that image. It's in my scrapbook. Now this particular one is, I actually, believe it or not, I actually flew this particular aircraft. This was at the Pima Air Museum. I was there, and I saw that the squadron was my old squadron before I went to Vietnam. So I had to find out if I flew. Now, the Marine Corps repaints their planes. They trade them back and forth with the Navy. So I contacted the fellow that I know, the marketing director for Pima, and I asked him if he could get me the serial number of this particular plane. He did. And sure enough, I flew this particular bird in June of 1969 before I left for Vietnam. Anyway, I wanted this for my wall. So as you can see, I went from there to there. And now it's hanging on my wall here in my office. But normally I don't replace skies, but when I do, I want them to look proper. And since we're talking about replacing skies, if you're going to replace the sky, you always remember, reflections are darker than the scene being reflected. That is so important. I was judging a competition about a month ago, and this gal had a beautiful image, but the sky was so much darker than the water. And I didn't want to ding her. I didn't want to give her a 4 out of 5. So I didn't. So I said, here's a 5, but next time, make sure that you make that. And I asked her, I said, did you replace the sky? And she goes, yes, I did. Anyway, just remember that reflections are darker than the scene being reflected. Now I want to talk about rays and rainbows just for a second. Crepuscular rays always have impact. And whenever I see them, I try to get a shot. And as we know, crepuscular rays emanate from the sun. But at the same time, rainbows appear at 180 degrees opposite the sun, right? And I think most people know this, but rainbows only appear when the sun is at 40 degrees elevation or less, but it's always 180 degrees opposite the sun. So here we have what's known as anti-crepuscular rays, which appear with rainbows 180 degrees opposite the sun. Now, I've done a lot of landscape shooting. I have never seen anti-crepuscular rays in my life until I moved down here. I'll let you read that on your own. I won't even try to explain it, but I have now entered this image into 3 contests, and it's won 3 contests. Getting the anti-crepuscular rays with the rainbow, with some rain clouds. I mean, just dynamite. But anyway, if you ever see them, now you'll know what they are. Rainbows in and of themselves usually aren't very interesting. I mean, that's a nice shot, but they're not going to win any awards. However, when you can mix it with a threatening sky or lightning and this or storm clouds, that will really help the image to pop. And the other thing that I've always said about rainbows, they should add to an already dramatic image. Don't expect the rainbow to be the drama. Now, having said that, when you see a rainbow, and this is just what I do personally, I find something interesting to put in front of it. When I was in the South Pacific, we were on Pitcairn Island, and there were terns everywhere. And there were rainbows everywhere when we were there in November. And we would see them several times a day. So I just sat myself up with my back to the sun and I waited. There was a rainbow would appear and this rainbow appeared and I just waited for the birds. I probably waited about 10 minutes. I had it on high-speed automatic and I probably took 100 shots and this was the best one I got. And again, that's not photoshopped. I had the rainbow and I had to put something in front of it. The same thing when you find a dramatic sky. If you see a dramatic sky, find something of interest to put in front of it. I was driving into the Grand Canyon and I said, oh, what a fantastic sky. We're going to get some great lightning strikes. But I was just dying. I couldn't find anything. We're out in the desert. And I said, wait a second. There's an S-curve. S-curves always score well. S-curve, dramatic clouds. An image like that is going to do well in a competition. Polarizing filters. I would bet that half the people here, maybe more than half, use polarizing filters for the obvious reasons. Numbers 1 through 4. However, I don't use polarizers. Let me take that back. I only use polarizers on cloudy days when I'm shooting landscape because it gets rid of the glare. The problem is that a lot of times the view of the lens is wider than the polarized area. So you get this light area over here and the dark area here. And I'll bet everybody that's watching this has had that happen to them. And so I simply do not use a polarizer if I'm shooting the sky, unless there's always an unless. If I'm using a telephoto, then I don't worry about it. But if I'm using any kind of a wide angle lens, even 50 or 60 millimeter, no, I don't want to take a chance on messing up the sky. Besides, I can do different things with the sky in post-processing. So as I said, I only use a polarizer when shooting flora on cloudy days, and that's to reduce glare. Here's a thought. When you're looking for things, eschew the mundane. Okay, I am always looking for anything that's out of the ordinary. Of course, I'm always looking for backlight, dust, sunburst, and silhouettes, but I'm always looking for something that's just a bit out of the ordinary. You know, I've been to Africa 8 times and, you know, I've shot zebra and I've shot giraffe and these are just different. They're not something that you're going to see every single day. This was a still life. And the thing that I'll mention about still life, if you're going to shoot a still life, focus stack it. In this particular image, I shot the tip of the saucer, the handle of the cup, and the back of the cup. And I blended those three, and then I merged them with a shot of some out of focus Christmas lights to get what I call the magic brew. But if you're going to shoot still life, focus stack, because you want everything front to back to be as sharp as you can get it. Another thing that kind of inspired me was shadows. I'm always looking for shadows. And in this particular case, this was a neighbor girl because my wife does not wear high heels like that. So I had asked this neighbor friend of ours if she'd pose for me, and all I was looking for was to create some shadows. And I call this one film noir. But as I mentioned before, backlight is so dramatic. And it's amazing I'll judge a contest that'll have 70 images, and I might get one or two that are backlit. And backlight is always dramatic. Dust always adds interest to an image, always. Now, here's a case when I got a starburst, I got dust, and I got backlight. By the way, these were all taken at the same ranch down here in Tucson. And this was in Zion National Park, right at sunrise, and I happened to catch the sunburst. Sunburst always bring attention. If you look at this image, it's a rock. But, you know, the sunburst just adds something to it. Now, this is an area that is really overlooked. And I've gone, sometimes I've judged 2 or 3, maybe as many as 4 different competitions, and I never see a silhouette. Silhouettes can be spectacular if they're handled properly. So I just wanted to show you a couple here. First of all, with silhouettes, the subject of your silhouette has got to be readily recognizable. It's got to be something someone's going to recognize in an instant. And trees simply are not recognizable in an instant. Trees tend to come out as blobs. I know I have a couple trees in here, but they're individual. To shoot a forest, it comes out like an ink blob. That's all it is. So it needs to be something that's recognizable. And again, this was out at the ranch. I got 3 or 4 good shots here. This one I took in Bosque del Apache, but the best shots that I've ever gotten have been in Africa, and I was always up well before the sun rose, and always tried to stay out as late as I could. I mean, you talk about easily recognizable images, and these kind of images will always score well. Plus, they're just fun to shoot. You know, they just leave that little bit of mystery there. So, you know, when you're thinking about what I'm shooting, just give some thought to shooting silhouettes. Silhouettes can just be fun. And as far as getting creative indoors, I'm going to share a little trick with you. These Home Depot wood blinds. Now, I bought some, and I think they cost me $25, something like that. And here's my flash, and there's the blinds, and I shoot the flash through the blinds to get the effect. Remember what I was saying? Contrast, shadows, always create impact. Shooting a flash through the blinds. I use this all the time, and it just makes for interesting images. And I think I showed you this one before. And again, I had to play with this a bit. But again, it just shadows and contrast makes for very, very interesting images. Candid photos of people engaged in an activity are attention grabbers. This was a fisherman in Tahiti, and actually that's the tuna we had that night. This was at the Xavier Dobach mission here in Tucson. It was a tour guide, and whenever you catch people being people, people like looking at photographs of other people. And this was that day that when I was able to do that fireman's shoot. And what makes this image is I got the 3 principal players: the engineer, the fireman, and the conductor. I don't do street photography very often, but I couldn't pass up this shot. And it was right next door. This woman stuck her head out. She smiled, and I said, smile. I picked up my camera and I got her shot perfectly framed. I was really pleased with that. That was a happy woman. So let's talk about snow. I guess it's been snowing there a little bit lately in Denver. Snow has got to have detail. Featureless, detailless snow is an absolute no-no. Always check your histogram when photographing snow. And usually when I shoot snow, now I haven't shot the snow in a couple years. I shoot sand, but when I'm shooting snow, a lot of times I'll just go HDR. I'll meter it, 2 over, 2 under, and that's the image. Motion blur, again, another way of being creative. All right. But before you go out, oh, I'm going to go shoot motion blur, I'm going to practice it. Practice on cars, bicycles, whatever. But practice before you go out for real. Okay. And practice makes perfect. You need a stable platform and a tripod is usually best. High-speed auto. And you begin shooting when your subject is 45 degrees off dead center. You're on high-speed auto and you continue shooting, follow through all the way till it's 45 degrees off dead center, leaving the frame. So you're starting to shooting when the image is to your far left, and you keep on shooting until it's all the way over at your far right, and hopefully you've captured that shot right in the center. You know, 1/10 of a second on this shot, and it's always a guess. This was a 90th of it. No, this was a lucky guess to catch these cheetahs. I knew I had to shoot faster than 1/10 of a second, but so I shot this at a 90th, and this was also another international competition winner. I was real pleased with this shot. And in this case, I got my motion, I got the blur from the people. I made the subject stationary. I shot this up in Beaver Creek, at the Beaver Creek skating rink. So, you know, and people do a lot of birding. There's a lot of bird shooters. Wing position is critical in bird photos. And this is probably, other than interaction with another species or interaction among its own species, this is probably the best wing position for birds. This is probably the second best wing position. They're just totally opposite, one up and one down. If there was a third one, if the wings were down, I would want it in front of the, I would want it leading the birds. If the wings were up, I would want it in back. But you're looking for some type of symmetry. Now, this is a good wing position, but not as good as the other two. I think I took all these in Bosque. I don't remember. Either that or in Nebraska. Now, there's 2 factors that militate against this image scoring well. First of all, you got a merger. Bingo. And thank you for playing. And then the wing position is non-symmetrical. So I won't even give a thought to submitting an image like this. However, story is king in wildlife, and that always scores well. So anytime you can get behavior, that's what you want. Night photography. Now, night photography is a bit of an adventure. So it's a very different animal. And if you've never taken photos at a pitch black night, you're in for a few surprises. Most notably, you're going to find you don't know your camera as well as you think you do. Okay, the good nighttime photos have drama. And these 3 Milky Way shots, the one on the left is over the Grand Canyon, which means it's terrible because you can't see the Grand Canyon. The 2 on the right are much better because they have interesting foregrounds. Just shooting the Milky Way just isn't that interesting. It's a sky. Putting something in the foreground, that is what gives you your photograph. So when it comes to shooting at night, first and foremost, don't shoot alone at night. It can be dangerous. I mean, it really, really can. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I get behind my camera, I am oblivious to everything else, and that includes wildlife. So, if you want to practice in a darkened room, practice changing from aperture priority to shutter priority to manual. Change your settings. Don't forget to go to live view, and then the magnification feature, because that's what you're gonna need when you focus on a single star. And when you're comfortable with all that, locate and use every button and dial on the back of your camera before you go out and shoot. And there's one thing that is an absolute no-no, and it'll always happen. Never take one of those red lights. I know they're supposed to protect your night vision, but think about this. If you're out shooting at night, chances you're with one other person or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 others. And if everybody has those red headlamps, I guarantee you somebody is going to get a red flash of light into someone's long exposures. I did that one long exposure. It was an hour exposure in the desert. So I'm at 55 minutes and someone turns on a red light. It's gone. So never. And I'll tell you what you can use. The light of your phone. Believe it or not, the face of your phone has enough light to look at your camera without bothering anybody else. So anyway, we covered a lot of material tonight, and I'm opening this up for questions or answers.
I have a question. Hey, you had just a few black and white photos. You did mention Nick color effects. I'm wondering if you had used Nick's silver effects for those, or you did it in Photoshop, or you did it in Lightroom, or what?
Yeah, no, I don't use, and I do not use Silver Effects Pro. I have found that when I just go to the, when I, and just in Lightroom, when I click the black and white, I pretty much get what I want. It's, number one, I don't shoot black and white that often. But what I will do is if I think I have a great image and it doesn't pop, then I'll switch over to black and white. But I wish I could help you, but I'm not I'm certainly not a black and white expert. But I will use it. As I said, if I look at a color image and I like the composition and I know it's sharp and everything else about it, but it just doesn't pop, then I'll try black and white and I'll play with the contrast, trying to get it to pop.
Thank you.
Well, I either did a real good job of explaining or I put some people to sleep.
I was gonna ask you, I do have a personal question, but I was gonna say that some presentations, and I think this is included, that you don't leave a lot of room for questions because it was incredibly thorough, and I really appreciate that, Butch. But you mentioned something, and I want to make sure I heard it right. Did you say you only started taking photographs in 2009?
Yes.
So 15 years, going on 16. That's pretty impressive.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I like taking pictures. I really do.
Clearly, yeah. And I'll also say that the too few presentations show the original or before image before post-processing, and you did several times, and I really appreciate that.
Well, good, good. Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, the purpose of this was to help people with competitions, and Kyle said, no, I'd like you to go a little bit longer than that. That's why I just added this miscellaneous stuff that you see on the screen now. And I love taking pictures. I used to teach photography up in Vail, and I just want people to enjoy themselves and get better. I just want to share what I do. So anyway, I appreciate everybody being here.
That's just fantastic.
Butch,
It-
this is Oz. My thanks to you also. Wonderful presentation. And your picture of the violin, I remember you showed that in Camera Club, and it's been stuck in my mind since then. So that was quite a picture.
Oz, thank you. I appreciate that. Much appreciated. So I'm going to stop the share. And I guess I will bid you adieu. Kyle, thank you for inviting me. And for everybody who's still watching, we've got 28 people still. So that is terrific. Glenn, goodbye. Gwen,
Yeah.
Bye, Butch.
I'll see
It
you.
was
at-
great. I loved it.
Did,
I
did,
loved
did you
it,
see,
Butch.
did you see this when I did it at CCC?
No, I haven't, I wasn't able to watch that and I never did. And then I knew you were going to do it here, so I just never watched it there.
Oh, good.
So
I'm glad
this
you
is the
could make
first time I saw it.
it. All right, I'm glad you could make it.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. Just great stuff, Butch.
Thank you, Kyle. And I'll bid everybody adieu.
All right.
Oh,
Bye, Butch.
Thanks.
Bye now.
And
Thank you,
And
Butch.
thanks.
Thank you so
Great
much.
presentation.
Yeah, thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Butch. Thanks, Carl. Good night, John Boy.
Good night, Mary Ellen.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.